Hi there, and welcome to our podcast. This week at London Visited, we go to Whitehall, home to the British government and so much more, to tell you all about this iconic part of London. My name's Steve, and each week I'm going to bring to you the facts, history and information about different parts of this great capital. If you've been to London, are planning on visiting, live here, or just love London from afar, then this is the podcast for you. Also, don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, London Visited, to see videos covering this place and so many others across London, which we upload weekly. And now, to this week's podcast. So Whitehall is a road in the city of Westminster, in central London, which forms the first part from Trafalgar Square to Chelsea. It's the main thoroughfare running south from Trafalgar Square towards Parliament Square. The street is recognised as the centre of government of the UK and is lined with numerous departments and ministries, including the Ministry of Defence, Horse Guards and the Cabinet Office. Consequently, the name Whitehall is used as a metonym for the British Civil Service and government, and as the geographic name for the surrounding area. The name was taken from the Palace of Whitehall that was the residence of Kings Henry VIII through to William III, before its destruction by fire in 1698. Only the banqueting house survived. Whitehall was originally a wide road that led to the front of the palace. The route to the south was widened in the 18th century, following the destruction of the palace. As well as government buildings, the street is known for its memorial statues and monuments, including Britain's primary war memorial, the Cenotaph. The Whitehall Theatre, now the Trafalgar Studios, has been popular for fast comedies since the mid-20th century. The name Whitehall was used for several buildings in the Tudor period. It either referred to a building made of light stone or as a general term for any festival building. This included the Royal Palace of Whitehall, which in turn gave its name to the street. The street is about 0.4 miles, 0.64 kilometres long, and runs through the city of Westminster. It's part of the A3212, a main road in central London that leads towards Chelsea via the Houses of Parliament and Vauxhall Bridge. It runs south from Trafalgar Square, past numerous government buildings, including the Old War Office building, Horse Guards, the Ministry of Defence, the Cabinet Office and the Department of Health. It ends at the Cenotaph, the road ahead being Parliament Street. Great Scotland Yard and Horse Guards Avenue branch off to the east, while Downing Street branches off to the west at the southern section of the street. The nearest tube stations are Charing Cross at the north end and Westminster at the south. Numerous London buses run the route along Whitehall, and are well worth a trip just to have a look as you go through. If we look back at the history, there has been a route connecting Charing Cross to Westminster since the Middle Ages. In the 12th century, historian William Fitzstephen described it as a continued suburb mingled with large and beautiful gardens and orchards belonging to the citizens. The name Whitehall was originally only used for the section of road between Charing Cross and Holborn Gate. Beyond this, it was known as the street as far as King Street Gate, then King Street thereafter. It had become a residential street by the 16th century and had become a popular place to live by the 17th, with residents including Lord Howard of Effingham and Edmund Spencer. The Palace of Whitehall to the east of the road was originally named York Palace, but was renamed during the reign of King Henry VIII. The palace was redesigned in 1531 to 1532 and became the king's main residence later in the decade. He married Anne Boleyn here in 1533, followed by Jane Seymour in 1536, and died at the palace in 1547. Charles I owned an extensive art collection at the palace, and several of William Shakespeare's plays had their first performances here. It ceased to be a royal residence after 1689, when William III moved to Kensington Palace. The palace was damaged by fire in 1691, following which the front entrance was redesigned by Sir Christopher Wren, who is quite famous in London for many other buildings, including St Paul's Cathedral. In 1698, most of the palace was burnt to the ground accidentally after a fire started by a careless washerwoman. Wallingford House was constructed in 1572 by William Knollys, 1st Earl of Banbury, along with the western edge of Whitehall. It was subsequently used by Charles I. During the reign of William III, it was bought for the Admiralty. The old Admiralty buildings now sit on the house's site. Banqueting House was used as an extension to the Palace of Whitehall in 1622 by Inigo Jones. It is the only surviving portion of the palace after it was burnt down and was the first Renaissance building in London. It later became a museum to the Royal United Services Institute and has been open to the public since 1963. Oliver Cromwell moved to the street in 1647, taking up residence in Wallingford House. 2 years later, Charles I was carried through Whitehall on the way to his trial at Westminster Hall. Whitehall itself was a wide street and had sufficient space for a scaffold to be erected for the King's execution at Banqueting House. He made a brief speech before being beheaded. Cromwell died at the Palace of Whitehall in 1658. During the Great Plague of London, in 1665, people boarded coaches at Whitehall, then at the edge of urban London, in an attempt to escape. The King and court temporarily moved to Oxford to avoid the plague, while Samuel Pepys remarked in his diary on the 29th of June, "By water to Whitehall, where the court is full of wagons and people ready to go out of town. This end of town every day grows very bad with plague." Hi there, and thanks so much for listening to this podcast on the history of London. And if you're enjoying this, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Now, if you want to get more involved with London Visited, don't forget you can join us as a member by going to patreon.com/London Visited with so many different benefits. Or you could purchase a 4K photograph of London from our website, londonvisited.co.uk, both of which support us and keep the channel going. Once again, thanks for listening. And now, back to the podcast. By the 18th century, traffic was struggling along the narrow street south of Holbein Gate, which led to King Street Gate being demolished in 1723. Holbein Gate, in turn, was demolished in 1759. Meanwhile, Parliament Street was a side road alongside the palace leading to the Palace of Westminster. After the Palace of Whitehall was destroyed, Parliament Street was widened to match Whitehall's width. The present appearance of the streets date from 1899, after a group of houses between Downing Street and Great George Street were destroyed. By the time the palace was destroyed, separation of Crown and State had become important, with Parliament being necessary to control military requirements and pass laws. The government wanted to be some distance from the monarch, and the buildings around Whitehall, physically separated from St James's Palace by St James's Park, seemed to be a good place for ministers to work. The Horse Guards buildings were designed by William Kent and built during the 1750s on a former tiltyard site, replacing an earlier guardhouse erected during the Civil War. The building includes an archway for coach traffic and 2 pedestrian arches that provide access between Whitehall and the Horse Guards Parade. The central archway is marked with SMF and St MW, which denotes the boundary between St Martin in the Fields and St Margaret's Church, parish boundaries. During the 19th century, as private leases ran out on the residential buildings, ownership reverted to the Crown, which began to use them as public offices. The name Whitehall is now used as a metonym to refer to that part of the civil service which is involved in the government of the United Kingdom. The street's central portion is dominated by military buildings, including the Ministry of Defence, with the former headquarters of the British Army and Royal Navy, the Royal United Services Institute, the Horse Guards Building, and the Admiralty on the opposite side. Scotland Yard, the headquarters of London's Metropolitan Police Service, was originally located in Great Scotland Yard, off the north-eastern end of Whitehall. The buildings had been lodgings for the Kings of Scotland, on the part of the old Palace of Whitehall's grounds. By the 19th century, Little and Middle Scotland Yard had been merged into Whitehall Place, leaving only Great Scotland Yard. Number 4, Whitehall Place, had become vacant by the 1820s, which allowed Sir Robert Peel to use it as the main headquarters when forming the police in 1829. It was formerly named the Metropolitan Police Office, but became quickly known as Great Scotland Yard, and eventually Scotland Yard. The buildings were damaged in a series of bombings by Irish nationalists in 1883, and an explosion from a Fenian terrorist attack on the 30th of May 1884 blew a hole in Scotland Yard's outer wall and destroyed the neighbouring Rising Sun pub. The headquarters was moved away from Whitehall in 1890. Downing Street leads off to the south-west end of Whitehall, just above Parliament Street. It was named after Sir George Downing, who built a row of houses along the street around 1680, leading west from Whitehall. Following a number of terrorist attacks, the road was closed to the public in 1990 when security gates were erected at both ends. Additional security measures have been put in place along Whitehall to protect government buildings, following a £25 million streetscape project undertaken by the Westminster City Council. The project has provided wider pavements and better lighting, along with installing hundreds of concrete and steel security barriers. Richmond House at number 79 has held the Department of Health since 1987. The building is scheduled to be a temporary debating chamber from 2020, while the Houses of Parliament undergo a £7 billion refurbishment and modernisation programme. A number of statues and memorials have been built on and around Whitehall, commemorating military victories and leaders. The cenotaph was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens and erected at the southern end in 1919, commemorating victory in World War I, and later used as a memorial for both World Wars. It is the main war memorial in Britain, and an annual service is held here on Remembrance Sunday, led by the reigning monarch and leading politicians. In 2005, a national monument to the women of World War II was erected a short distance north of the cenotaph, in the middle of the Whitehall carriageway. The Royal Tank Regiment Memorial is at the north-east end of Whitehall, where Whitehall Court meets Whitehall Place. Erected in 2000, it commemorates the use of tanks in both World Wars and depicts 5 World War II tank crew members. The Gherkin Memorial is to the south of this, on Horse Guards Avenue to the east of Whitehall. Whitehall is also home to 6 other monuments, from north to south. These are of Prince George, Duke of Cambridge, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army; Liberal Party, Liberal Unionist Party and Unionist leader; Spencer Cavendish, 8th Duke of Devonshire; Douglas Haig, 1st Earl Haig, known as the Earl Haig Memorial; Field Marshal Montgomery, Commander of the 8th Army, the 21st Army, and Chief of the Imperial General Staff; William Slim, 1st Viscount Slim, Commander of the 14th Army, and Governor-General of Australia; and Alan Brooke, 1st Viscount Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. The Whitehall Theatre opened in 1930 at the northwest end of the street, on a site that had been previously Ye Old Ship Tavern in the 17th century. The revue Whitehall Follies opened in 1942, which drew controversy over its explicit content, featuring the stripper and actress Phyllis Dixie. The theatre became known for its farces, reviving a tradition on Whitehall that began with court jesters at the Palace during the 16th century. These included several plays featuring actor-manager Brian Rix throughout the 1950s, 60s and 1981's satirical Anyone for Dennis, written by John Wells and Private Eye editor Richard Ingrams. The venue was Grade 2 listed in 1996 and renamed the Trafalgar Studios in 2004. Because of its importance as the centre of British government, several political comedies are based in and around Whitehall. These include the BBC's Yes Minister and The Thick of It. Whitehall is one of 3 purple squares as well on the British Monopoly Board, along with Pall Mall and Northumberland Avenue. All 3 streets converge at Trafalgar Square. So, I hope you enjoyed our in-depth look at Whitehall and how a small piece of road has so much history and power concentrated in it. Whatever podcast service you use to listen to this, please do subscribe and get updates and new shows, and please do leave us some feedback. Let me know any places you'd like to feature in future podcasts by emailing me directly on londonvisited@gmail.com or by contacting us on Twitter and Instagram through @LondonVisited. Thanks for listening and really hoped you enjoyed our podcast. And don't forget to visit our London Visited YouTube channel for more on this great city. See you soon.